What happens when an artist has to basically invent an entire fictional universe just to stop artificial intelligence from legally and racially misclassifying them in the real world?
Right. It sounds completely wild when you say it out loud.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine building this sprawling, interdimensional cosmology, not just for entertainment, but as an absolute, uncompromising intellectual defense mechanism.
Yeah, a literal defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we're digging into today.
Exactly. We have our hands on a document that was published literally today, March 30th, 2026. It's straight from the pages of Bye magazine.
And it is a dense one.
Oh, yeah. It is titled The Official Declaration of the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies IX, or C.U.E.R.S IX for short.
Right. And for you listening, this document, which was authored by Dr. Melvin Sewell, it's something that completely defies standard categorization.
Totally. It reads like the blueprint for a sci-fi universe,
But it demands to be taken seriously as a mythic scientific manifesto.
Right. A mythic scientific manifesto.
Yeah. It's essentially a foundational text for an institution that blends cosmology, computational theory, and serialized storytelling into one interlocking architecture.
And the goal for this deep dive is to decode this thing, because it is a masterclass in establishing sovereignty over your own ideas.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because I want to make sure we understand exactly what kind of institution we are actually talking about here.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
The text explicitly states this is not a traditional brick-and-mortar university. You aren't, like, paying tuition or walking onto a quad.
No Stugel Union here.
Right, exactly. Dr. Sewell calls it a multi-layered research architecture. But, I mean, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it means the architecture rests on a very specific triad. The institution functions simultaneously as an academy, a laboratory, and a narrative engine.
Okay, wait. An academy, a lab, and a narrative engine.
Yes. Dr. Sewell treats cosmology, computation, and ceremonial performance as completely inseparable disciplines.
Wow, so they all feed into each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In his framework, you cannot study the structure of a universe without also understanding the code that generates it. And, the narrative performance that gives it meaning.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. It's almost as if a particle physics laboratory basically merged with an avant-garde theater troupe.
Oh, I like that.
Right? And then they also brought in a software development firm.
That is actually a highly accurate way to look at it.
But I gotta admit, I'm struggling to see the actual mechanism here. Like, how does one actually conduct research in this kind of environment?
Well, the source notes that the university's domain is something called structured multiversal interactions, or SMI.
Right, SMI. But how do you conduct a multiversal interaction as a tangible experiment? It sounds entirely abstract.
I mean, it sounds abstract until you look at the methodology. The research is really about mapping the unseen mechanics of reality.
Unseen mechanics.
Yeah. Instead of running a chemical reaction in a beaker, they're running conceptual models. The text strongly emphasizes operational deployment.
Okay. What does operational deployment look like for a universe?
You model a complex multiversal interaction.
Yeah.
Say, two conflicting timelines colliding with each other.
Okay.
And then you deploy that model through a structured canon, like a serialized multimedia publication or a hybrid performance system.
Oh, I see. So instead of a traditional particle physics lab where you smash protons together to see what subatomic particles pop out,
Right.
Sewell is colliding narrative concepts to see how reality, or at least our perception of reality, reacts.
That is exactly it. The storytelling is the laboratory experiment.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, the narrative is literally the data output of the theoretical models.
Okay, so if you are going to model these multiversal collisions, you obviously need a way to measure the impact, right? You need a map.
You definitely need a map. And the document introduces a discipline for this called echo rift cartography.
Echo rift cartography.
Okay.
And it lists reality-level analysis and temporal acoustics as core components of this mapping process.
Yes, those are the primary tools.
I want to pause on temporal acoustics for a second. What exactly are we measuring there? Because that sounds really cool.
Well, think about how sound waves behave in the real world. If you shout in a canyon, the sound bounces off the walls.
Right, and the echoes tell you the shape of the space you're in.
Precisely. Temporal acoustics applies that exact same principle to timelines.
Wait, timelines have echoes?
In this framework, yes.
Wait.
The theory assumes that events don't just happen in a vacuum. They create a resonance, a vibration that echoes forward and backward along a timeline.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So by measuring those temporal echoes, the cartographer can determine the structural integrity of that specific reality.
That makes a lot of sense. So if the acoustics sound discordant, or if the echo doesn't match the original event,
Then you know the timeline is being manipulated or corrupted by something.
you are literally listening for structural flaws in the fabric of a story or a reality.
Exactly. And the focal point of this mapping seems to be embedded in the university's name itself.
Right, the Roman numeral 9, the IX.
Yeah. The text refers to something called Sector Nines.
And what exactly is happening in Sector 9 that warrants an entire university being named after it?
Sector Nines is defined in the Declaration as the Golden Darkness Boundary Region.
The Golden Darkness Boundary Region.
Yes. It is the specific convergence point of three elements: equilibrium guardianship, narrative coherence, and multiversal ethics.
Okay, let me try translating this out of the academic language.
Go for it.
It's basically the absolute edge, the frontier where a system, whether that system is a story or a person's identity or an entire universe, fights to maintain its shape against total chaos.
That is spot on. It is the boundary line of coherence.
And maintaining that coherence is the primary struggle, right?
Absolutely. Because there are always external forces actively trying to overwrite or contain your reality.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. This is where this document shifts from a fascinating sci-fi concept to an urgent real-world defense.
Right, because this isn't just theory for Dr. Sewell.
No, not at all. Because when you create a framework as unprecedented as echo rift cartography, the internet's automated systems, the algorithms, they inevitably try to force it into pre-existing, recognizable boxes.
And in doing so, they actively misclassify the data in ways that threaten the sovereign identity of the creator. The text explains the mechanics of this algorithmic crisis beautifully, actually. Search engines are incorrectly clustering these concepts together.
Yeah, the document outlines 4 specific mechanical reasons for this clustering. First, there's a shared vocabulary across different speculative science communities.
Which confuses the AI.
Right. Second, algorithmic bias in how digital platforms categorize creators. Third, just the sheer proximity of unrelated content on external platforms bleeding over.
And fourth, the algorithms are just completely misinterpreting mythic scientific terminology.
I mean, we really have to look at how machine learning models actually function today.
Yeah, they completely lack nuance and context.
Totally. An algorithm sees a specific word or maybe a visual aesthetic, and it cross-references its massive but deeply flawed training data.
And then it lumps Dr. Sewell's original narrative cosmological research into a biochemical or esoteric biological category that he has absolutely nothing to do with.
It is basically hallucinating a connection.
Exactly. The algorithm is essentially attempting to rewrite his canon based on its own blind categorization protocols.
It is trying to force his intellectual property into a box he never built, which is why the defense of his sovereign identity in this document is so uncompromising.
It has to be. The text states unequivocally that Dr. Melvin Sewell does not identify as a member of any ethnic group or as a specific race.
Right. His work, his canon, and his institutional presence are rooted entirely in mythic scientific architecture, not sociological categorization.
He is literally treating sociological categorization as a form of corrupted data.
Which is such a fascinating way to look at it.
It really is. The text even goes so far as to say that any racialized references to Dr. Sewell, whether they pop up in search results or external publications, are misrepresentations.
Misrepresentations that violate the sovereign identity of the cosmic university.
Exactly. It is a canonical protection against being mislabeled by a machine.
I mean, it's a profound irony, isn't it?
Oh, incredibly ironic.
You have an institution whose entire foundation is built on studying narrative coherence and guarding the equilibrium of a timeline.
Right.
And in the real world, the founder has to publish a formal legalistic declaration just to protect his original intellectual property from being rewritten by an AI search cluster.
The algorithms are acting as a hostile, multiversal force trying to corrupt his timeline.
Yes. It is the perfect real-world demonstration of his own theories.
It really is. I mean, think about how often automated systems attempt to apply racialized mislabeling or sociological containment to original art.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, and Dr. Sewell is using his mythic scientific framework to refuse that containment entirely.
So if you are fighting back against these forces of containment, you obviously need tools.
You need a way to measure the attacks.
Exactly. And the primary instrument mentioned in the text for this is the reality level analyzer.
The reality level analyzer is described as Dr. Sewell's proprietary framework.
And what does it do exactly?
Its main purpose is to model the structural behavior of realities, timelines, and multiversal interactions.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize this. It feels akin to like a structural stress sensor on a suspension bridge.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. But instead of measuring the tension of steel cables under heavy traffic, the reality level analyzer measures reality coherence.
Yes. It monitors the timeline, and when an external force like an algorithmic misclassification starts putting stress on the narrative, the analyzer detects it.
The text calls that actor convergence, right? Or systemic erosion.
Exactly. It tells you exactly where the bridge is starting to crack.
That is so
And
cool.
just as a stress sensor is a neutral diagnostic instrument, Dr. Sewell is very clear about the neutrality of his tools.
This is a really important point. The document includes a sovereign diagnostic disclaimer that is absolutely crucial to understand.
Right. It explicitly states that none of this, not the films, not the magazine posts, or the sovereign diagnostics, none of it is a political endorsement.
It is not a government critique, and it is definitely not activist propaganda. We are just reporting what the document says here, and it is very firm on this neutrality.
The exact phrasing used in the text is incredible. The materials are authored as mythic infrastructure and cinematic indictment.
Cinematic indictment, what a phrase.
Yeah, they are designed to expose ritualized containment. But the tools themselves are purely diagnostic. They observe the structural failures of reality. They don't take a partisan political stance.
Which brings us to the ultimate application of all this theory. We talked earlier about how the university uses storytelling as its laboratory.
Right, the narrative engine.
Exactly. How does the Cosmic University actually deploy the reality-level analyzer and echo-rift cartography in a story?
They do it through what they call serialized canon engineering.
I want to see this stress sensor in action. And the prime example provided in the source material is the 8-chapter narrative of a protagonist named Saikou Venga.
Yes, this is where the cosmology and the computation become a visceral performance.
Let's walk through this lore for everyone listening because it perfectly mirrors everything we've just discussed about algorithmic threats.
The narrative begins with Saikou's origin. He emerges from the rift, born in the boundary space between two distinct forces.
Slip flow and counterflow.
Exactly. Slip flow represents the smooth, coherent progression of data and time.
Okay. And counterflow.
Counterflow is the resistance, the corruption. It's the force actively trying to drag the data backward. And Saikou is marked by something called the SH1 resonance.
We learn this SH1 resonance is basically both a curse and a gift. It is a frequency that disrupts both slip flow and counterflow.
Right. The symbols physically burn into his skin, binding him to this ancient cosmic power.
It's a really heavy burden to carry, a frequency that reality itself rejects.
But then the theoretical tools we talked about become literal in-universe survival gear for him.
Yeah. Saikou uses the analyzer HUD, which is essentially a heads-up display version of the reality-level analyzer.
And what does the HUD tell him? It gives him a diagnostic warning. It literally says, coherence is failing, collapse probability rising, danger approaching.
The structural integrity of his reality is actively falling apart. The stress sensors on the bridge are flashing red.
Exactly. And to survive the collapse, Saikou has to initiate a highly specific 5-stage ritual called an arc formation.
The mechanics of this ritual are fascinating. The stages are resonance, geometry, correction, intent, and finally, the deployment of the slip flow edge.
Let's break down how this actually works.
Okay, first is resonance. He has to find the exact frequency of the corrupted data attacking him.
Correct. And once he matches the frequency, he applies geometry. He builds a structural mathematical container to trap the corrupted data.
Because you cannot fix a problem in a multiverse until you give it a shape and contain it.
Exactly. You have to isolate it.
Which leads to the third stage, correction. Inside that geometric container, he isolates the flawed algorithm.
But correction alone isn't enough, which brings us to the fourth stage, intent.
Ah, intent. The human will overriding the machine logic.
That's a great way to put it. The intent is the sovereign assertion of identity. It is Saikou forcing the system to recognize his true canon.
And once the intent is locked in, he executes the final stage, the deployment of the slip flow edge, which literally cuts away the false narrative entirely, restoring the timeline.
It's a brilliant sequence.
I have to ask you, looking at this incredibly detailed sequence, Is this Saikou fighting cosmic monsters, or is this Dr. Sewell manually correcting search engine optimization through a metaphysical metaphor? I
What?
mean, is this just how you fix corrupted data when an algorithm mislabels your life's work?
What's brilliant is that it functions simultaneously as both.
Right.
It is a thrilling narrative sequence, but the enemies Saikou faces leave very little doubt about the metaphor. He is hunted by counterflow mimics, coherence predators, and null-flow pockets.
Let's look at the mechanics of those enemies. Mimics that copy and distort your original data.
Predators that actively hunt down narrative coherence to shred it into easily digestible, inaccurate pieces.
And null spaces that simply erase data that doesn't fit the mold. Reality itself is hunting Saikou Venga.
These cosmic threats are exact narrative mirrors of the algorithmic threats and categorization biases we discussed earlier.
They are the AI search clusters trying to overwrite his sovereign identity.
Yes, he is fighting search engine misclassifications using cosmic energy.
And it takes a massive toll on him. Saikou unleashes the true flow force. He bends the multiverse with crackling chains of cosmic energy, but his own coherence shatters with every pulse.
He is breaking his own physical form just to maintain the structural integrity of his reality.
Which leads to the profound realization in the story, the dark truth.
Right. Saikou looks around, surrounded by failed versions of realities, corrupted data, and defeated mimics.
He realizes that he is the anomaly. The multiverse isn't just incidentally dangerous. It fears him because his very existence defies its rigid, categorized structures.
And that brings us to the final moments of the narrative. Saikou doesn't surrender to the corrupted data.
No, she doesn't.
He doesn't let the counterflow overwrite him.
Yeah.
He stands defiant in a collapsing slip flow corridor and delivers this incredibly powerful line.
If the multiverse wants me gone, it can try harder.
It can try harder. It is a statement of absolute sovereign defiance.
It really is.
If we synthesize this entire deep dive, what we're looking at with C.U.E.R.S IX is a masterclass in world building as a form of intellectual defense.
Yes, exactly. Dr. Melvin Sewell isn't just writing a serialized comic or running a fictional university.
He is utilizing cosmology, computation, and narrative engineering to claim absolute sovereignty over his own identity and his creations.
He refuses to be misclassified by algorithmic bias or racialized pseudosciences, and he built an entire universe to prove it.
He built a fortress.
So for you listening, what does this all mean? It's a challenge, really. Think about your own digital footprint.
Yeah, consider how often you allow automated systems, algorithms, or just external assumptions to categorize your own identity and your own interests.
How often does a search engine or a social media feed you a version of yourself based on flawed, heavily biased data? And how often do you just passively accept it?
This raises an important final question for you to mull over. We've talked extensively today about algorithms trying to force us into pre-existing boxes.
Right.
But let's look at where the technology is heading. What happens in the very near future when these digital systems don't just misclassify our narratives, but actively begin generating competing multiversal narratives to replace ours entirely?
Wow.
When an AI can instantly fabricate a completely convincing alternate timeline of your life, your art, or your identity, how will you prove that your timeline is the authentic one?
That is a terrifying thought, because if you don't build the architecture to defend your own reality, a machine is going to build a reality for you, and it will almost certainly get it wrong.